Well, political philosopher Dr. Odonga has brought out his analysis on the coming 2026 presidential election. Who could win? Can Museveni be taken out through election? Here is what he had to say.
There is a huge conversation between political scientists and political philosophers that relate to the 2026 presidential elections. And I happen to be both. So listen to me attentively. The political scientists say if Bobi Wine can get votes in Baganda, parts of Basoga, and in all the urban centers of Uganda, he can win the presidential election because the greatest number of registered voters are in the central. Out of the 17 million voters, about 7 million voters reside in Uganda. So their prediction as political scientists is that Bobi Wine can win. Of course, not everyone in the central would vote for Bobi Wine. That is a huge debate in political science. But in political philosophy, the debate is, of all the countries in Africa, how many presidential elections have changed presidents? We've had in Zambia when Kenneth Kaunda was voted out. We've had recently in Botswana. We've had in Ghana. We've had in Senegal. We've had in Somaliland. And we've had in Mauritius. So only 6 elections out of over 1,200 elections in Africa since 1990 has changed presidential candidates. So the question is to us political philosophers, is Uganda, can the elections in Uganda change the presidency? When I was young, I used to think presidential elections could change the presidency. But now that I've grown a little older, I doubt whether presidential elections can change the presidency. I even doubt my earlier thoughts. In 2001, I voted. In 1996, I voted for Paul Kawanga Semogere. In 2001, I voted for Agre Awori. In 2006, I voted for Dr. Besigye. In 2011, I voted for Dr. Kiza Besigye. In 2016, I voted for Dr. Kiza Besigye. In 2021, I did not vote for any presidential candidate. So the trajectory, in my opinion, is that changing a presidential candidate from a political philosophy perspective in Uganda is possible, but very unlikely. So as an individual, I've decided to sit back and not support any presidential candidate and watch. Thank you.
I could walk, see, here, I should celebrate. Think I could change my mind, maybe elevate.
Well, Museveni's power and why elections alone may never unseat him. In other words, here is why I agree with Dr. Odonga. President Yoweri Museveni's long stay in power has made Uganda one of Africa's most studied cases of political dominance. Having first taken power in 1986 through an armed rebellion that overthrew a military regime, Museveni positioned himself as a liberator and reformer. Yet, nearly 4 decades later, he remains in charge through a system that critics say has fused the state and the state, the ruling party, and the security forces into a single structure of control. This video does not advocate for rebellion or violence in any form. Instead, it's a sober observation of Uganda's political reality. The same method through which Museveni entered power, force, has become the main shield preserving his rule. Since the 1990s, Uganda has held multiple general elections, but none have resulted in a peaceful transfer of power. Opposition figures such as Kiza Besigye, Norbert Mao, and more recently Robert Kyagulanyi, also known as Bobi Wine, have faced systemic obstacles: arrest, intimidation, restricted access to media, and alleged vote rigging. Election reforms have repeatedly been diluted, and state institutions like the Electoral Commission, police, and military remain heavily influenced by the ruling national resistance movement. Museveni's survival strategy blends political manipulation with coercive strength. He has neutralized internal dissent within the NRM, co-opted regional leaders through patronage networks, and maintained a loyal military elite. Uganda's constitution, once a tool of reform, has been amended to remove both term and age limits. Think about that if you have your brain. Legalizing perpetual incumbency. In essence, Museveni's grip on power mirrors the method by which he gained it. Control of the gun. Elections serve more as formalities to legitimize his rule than a genuine instrument of political change. This doesn't mean Ugandans should resort to violence. History has shown that armed change often brings only new cycles of suffering. However, it means that any transition from Museveni's rule is unlikely to come purely through ballots unless deep structural reforms occur, including military neutrality, independent institutions, and protection of civic freedoms. Until such changes take root, Uganda remains caught in a paradox. A nation where the path to power began with the gun, and where that same shadow continues to dominate the promise of democracy. And in history, no president in Africa that entered through power was taken out through election. And it was only 3 presidents who entered through military coups who were taken out. So the record is clear, and Dr. Odonga is very right.